What happened here, April 19, 1995? This is 200 Northwest 5th Street in downtown Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, once the site of the 9-story Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. On April 19, 1995, it was the target of a massive 5,000-pound bomb, immediately collapsing a third of the building and killing over 160 people. At the time, it was the deadliest act of terrorism on U.S. soil. The bomb plot was known to 4 people, 3 being disgruntled U.S. ex-military who are angry with recent violence involving the U.S. government in Texas, Idaho, and Iraq, so they plotted to kill as many federal employees as possible. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was a 9-story concrete and granite federal government complex named after federal judge Alfred P. Murrah. It opened on March 2, 1977, less than 2 years after Judge Murrah's death. The Murrah Building housed several federal agencies, which made it their target of revenge. They believed the bombing would encourage others to join them in rising up against the government. In fact, it had the opposite effect, with the perpetrators not only being known and jailed within days, but the nation sympathized with the victims, which included many children. From the 9th floor down, the federal agencies on the day of the bombing included the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Secret Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, a Marine Corps Recruiting Office, Veteran Affairs, Customs, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, Army Recruiting, the Highway Division, the Government Accountability Office, Department of Defense, Department of Investigative Services, and the Social Security Administration. Occupying the 2nd floor was America's Kids, a children's daycare center. 19 children died. The bombing was orchestrated by Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh. McVeigh was a former U.S. Army soldier, frustrated by the government increasingly encroaching on the rights of individuals, especially in regards to the Second Amendment, as well as U.S. involvement in foreign wars, specifically the recent Gulf War in Iraq and the deaths of innocent Iraqis. To McVeigh, U.S. federal employees and their children were not innocent civilians. McVeigh also expressed anti-Jewish sentiment and was often in the company of white supremacists while claiming he was not a racist. However, co-conspirator Michael Fortier testified that McVeigh would suggest people read the 1978 novel The Turner Diaries, written by a self-described white nationalist and supremacist, William Luther Pierce, under the pen name Andrew MacDonald. While reading and suggesting this book to others wouldn't necessarily conclude McVeigh was racist, the Murrah Building bombing is strikingly similar to the book, depicting a large truck bomb destroying the FBI headquarters and whose main character's goal is to initiate a race war. While most of the bombing focused on McVeigh as the person that delivered and detonated the bomb, Terry Nichols was just as involved with the planning and mixing of the components. These 3 Army veterans' grievances toward federal police agencies came about most notably from 2 incidents. The first incident was August 1992 at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. The Weaver family, concerned with the end of times and a distrust of government, wished to live as remote as possible. So in 1983, they moved from Iowa to a mountaintop in the northern Idaho panhandle, where they built a cabin. They led an unconventional life for this time, having no running water or electricity and homeschooling their children. Though the Weavers' lifestyle was to be left alone, living off the grid, growing and hunting most of their food and protecting their food and property from varmint, having numerous weapons was a concern for the U.S. government too. The most concerning to the federal government was Mr. Weaver being trained as a Green Beret and now meeting regularly with the Aryan Nations, a white supremacist group. So while everything else may be overlooked, it was the October 1989 sale of 2 sawed-off shotguns by Mr. Weaver to an undercover FBI agent that would end with the infamous Ruby Ridge incident, a charge which would later be dropped as entrapment. In early 1990, Weaver missed his court date due to a suspicious clerical error. He was arrested without incident, but was faced with the threat of losing his property if he didn't agree to be an informant on the Aryan Nation. He refused, and a federal grand jury indicted him. Convinced he would not receive a fair trial, Weaver avoided arrest by holding out in his cabin with his wife and 3 children. During this time, Miss Weaver gave birth to their 4th child. Family friends were allowed to come and go, but it didn't look like Mr. Weaver would ever leave the mountain. In the summer of 1992, having arrested anti-government protesters, skinheads, and even reporters for a variety of reasons, including trespassing to gun smuggling, federal agents ran out of patience and began surveilling the Weaver property in full camouflage in an effort to capture him. On August 21st, the Weaver family dog barked at a group of U.S. Marshals hiding in the bushes. a marshal shot and killed the dog. Weaver's 14-year-old son, Sammy, fired into the bushes and ran for cover along with the family friend, Kevin Harris. In the shootout, Harris killed an agent. When Sam left his hiding place to run home, he was shot in the back and died. Due to the agent's death, the next day, on August 22nd, federal agents were given an order to shoot to kill any adult male holding a weapon. The day after the shootout, the FBI would follow through. Mr. Harris and Mr. Weaver were going to the shed to prepare Sam's body for burial. Before they could get there, an agent sharpshooter fired upon Harris and Weaver. They scrambled back to the house. Randy's wife of 21 years, Vicky, was holding the door for them when a bullet went through the window and hit her in the face, killing her as she held their baby. 9 days later, having lost his wife and son and shot twice himself, Randy Weaver and his remaining 3 children joined Kevin Harris, who had surrendered the previous day with a life-threatening gunshot to the chest. The event was widely criticized and covered by the media at the time. The second incident was less than a year later near Waco, Texas, but the nation had a new president. The Democrats had taken the presidency for the first time in 12 years, and a new attorney general was appointed to oversee the FBI. Maybe things would be different. The Branch Davidians' Mount Carmel complex is a few miles east of Waco, Texas. It had been established in the 1930s. It was in the late 1980s when David Koresh became their spiritual leader. On February 28, 1993, the ATF attempted to arrest Koresh on charges of illegal weapons possession. There is no consensus for who shot first, but 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were killed. This became a major media event as well as an active tourist attraction. Tim McVeigh was filmed there on March 30 during an interview by an SMU journalism student, Michelle Rausch, while on her spring break. He was filmed sitting on his car, selling anti-government and pro-Second Amendment bumper stickers laid out on the hood with slogans such as "Ban guns," "Make the streets safe for a government takeover," "Fear the government that fears your guns," and another with the Soviet hammer and sickle and swastika flanking the phrase, "Politicians love gun control." On April 19, 1993, nearly 2 months of negotiations later, and David Koresh dying from a gunshot wound to the abdomen, millions of Americans watched on television, including Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who watched from the Nichols family farm in Michigan, as the ATF broke through the complex wall with the dozer tank and launched tear gas. The complex began to burn. While a few Davidians escaped, some on fire, 76 Branch Davidians remained inside. They would die, including 22 children. 18 of them were under the age of 10. After the complex had burned to the ground, the federal agents lowered the Branch Davidian flag, and in its place, stacked the American, Texas, and ATF flags over the burned complex. McVeigh cited these incidents regarding the Weavers at Ruby Ridge and the Branch Davidians in Waco as examples of the government's disregard for human life, even though McVeigh, with the help of others, would plan their own mass murder of innocent people, including children, on the 2-year anniversary of the Waco siege and the 220th anniversary of the American Revolution. After his Army service, Michael Fortier returned home to Kingman, Arizona, where he was employed as the True Value bookkeeper for the store at 3320 East Andy Devine Avenue in Kingman, Arizona. Fortier, having stayed good friends with McVeigh, let McVeigh stay at his trailer home for brief periods through 1993 and 1994, between McVeigh's traveling and working on the gun show circuit. McVeigh was the best man at Fortier's Las Vegas wedding, and for a short time they worked at the True Value store together. The True Value store was demolished in 2006. Fortier and his wife Lori, frequent smokers of crystal meth, had knowledge of the bomb plot 6 months earlier in October of 1994. Though Fortier wanted nothing to do with possessing the actual bomb, he accompanied McVeigh on one of his trips to the Murrah Building, where McVeigh described the details of his plan. In the desert outside Kingman, McVeigh and Nichols tested their bombs using explosives stolen from a quarry near Marion, Kansas, and ammonium nitrate McVeigh and Nichols purchased using fake names. While Michael Fortier helped raise money for the group by selling guns stolen by McVeigh and Nichols, his wife Lori provided the typewriter and discarded the ink ribbon McVeigh used to create a fake South Dakota driver's license using the name Bob Kling, with which McVeigh rented the Ryder truck. At one time, all 4 involved in the bombing lived in Kingman, Arizona. 275 miles north of Oklahoma City, on April 14, 1995, McVeigh arrived in Junction City, Kansas from Arizona in his newly purchased yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis with Arizona license plate LZC034. This license plate would be significant in his capture. He stayed here at the Dreamland Motel at 520 East Flint Hills Boulevard. According to the owner, McVeigh was slow and unsure when answering to his name and address and ended up providing his real ID at check-in. It would seem he was having trouble keeping his fake names and addresses aligned. The address on his ID was 3616 North Van Dyke in Decker, Montana. This is Decker, Montana. The owner was suspicious of his behavior, so put him in room 25, right next to her office. McVeigh noted there would be only one occupant. The motel was demolished on April 19, 2011, the 16th anniversary of the bombing. On April 15, 1995, Terry Nichols says he dropped McVeigh off at the McDonald's on 1127 South Washington Street. Nichols told the FBI that McVeigh said he would be calling a friend. The friend has never been identified, and other witnesses have described a dark-haired person with him over the next 2 days that does not look like Nichols. The dark-haired Nichols, however, could not have gone far, as he was available to mix the bomb components with McVeigh on his way to Oklahoma City a few days later. McVeigh walked from the McDonald's to Elliott's Body Shop at 1430 Golden Belt Boulevard, where he rented the Ryder truck under the name of Bob Kling. McVeigh was almost 28 years old at the time, having been born on April 23, 1968. But, as a well-planned clue, he used the birth date of Wednesday, April 19, 1972. This is the anniversary of 2 North Vietnamese MiG-17s bombing 4 U.S. warships east of Vietnam. One of the damaged ships was the 7th Fleet flagship named USS Oklahoma City. McVeigh picked up the Ryder van on April 17, the last day he stayed at the Dreamland Hotel. He then drove the van toward Oklahoma City, where he would make a stop along the way where he and Terry Nichols would load the barrels, mix the bomb components, and prepare the fuses. On Wednesday morning, April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh parked a Ryder rental truck in the loading lane on the north side of the Murrah Building, near the intersection of Northwest 5th Street and Robinson Avenue. He'd already lit the first fuse for his bomb, concealed inside, made with ammonium nitrate fuel oil, a fertilizer-based explosive. He lit the second fuse and walked away. About 5 minutes later, at 9:02 a.m., with the building full of nearly 600 employees, 250 visitors, and many of their children, the bomb detonated, immediately destroying all 9 floors, blowing most of the roof off and collapsing the entire north face of the building. 25 surrounding buildings were also destroyed, and another 300 surrounding buildings received damage. Outside, witnesses reported seeing and feeling the effects of the blast up to 30 miles away. Survivors in the building described their co-workers disappearing, having fallen into the rubble below, themselves having only inches of concrete to balance on while they waited for rescue. Though the first calls came in 1 minute after the blast, a few blocks away, Fire Station 1 was already gearing up, knowing what they just heard and felt would be devastating. When they arrived, rescue workers and citizens were already running into the rubble, looking for survivors and working together to create human chains, assisting in bringing each other out to safety as pieces of the building continued to fall. As medical personnel and volunteers looked through the rubble for survivors, the bomber was driving north of Oklahoma City on Interstate 35. About 10:15 that same morning, Oklahoma Highway Patrol Trooper Charlie Hanger was about 80 miles north of Oklahoma and a few miles north of Perry, Oklahoma, a town of 5,000 residents, when he spotted a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis without a license plate. He pulled the vehicle over. As Hanger spoke with the driver, who was McVeigh, he learned he had no registration for the car and noticed a handgun holstered inside his jacket. Since McVeigh did not have a permit to carry a concealed weapon in Oklahoma, he was arrested. He later claimed to have removed the license plate on purpose. So in the event authorities would be looking for the owner of a long yellow car near the site of the bombing, he removed his license plate, which, ironically, alerted authorities. For his staunch Second Amendment stance being the root of his grievances, illegally concealing a handgun, again, ironically, led to his arrest. He was brought to the Noble County Jail. By the next day, the FBI had already identified the location of the Ryder truck rental and released the sketch taken from the description from employees. The owner of the Dreamland Hotel identified the sketch as being Timothy McVeigh. McVeigh, being held under his real name, was found to be in the custody of Noble County. He was soon moved from the courthouse at 300 Courthouse Drive in Perry, Oklahoma, to federal custody. Meanwhile, cleanup and rescue continued day and night. After 17 days searching for the last 3 remaining victims, the search was called off and the Murrah Building planned for demolition. Rescue workers were confident of the victims' locations, but it was too dangerous to proceed under the remaining unstable structure. The Murrah Building was demolished on April 23, 1995. When the cleanup resumed, the last 3 victims were found were expected. In only a few days after the bombing, all 4 suspects would be known to the FBI. In exchange for leniency, the Fortier couple testified against both McVeigh and Nichols. Michael Fortier spent just over 10 years in prison before entering the Witness Protection Program in 2006, joining his wife, who was granted immunity. They have 2 children. To this day, he remains in the Witness Protection Program. Terry Nichols was convicted of manslaughter and conspiracy on December 24, 1997, and avoided the death penalty, seemingly for not having lit the fuse. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He is currently being held in Florence, Colorado. In August 1995, McVeigh was indicted, but it wasn't until February 28, 1997, the 2-year anniversary of the first ATF Waco shootout, that newspapers began reporting McVeigh had confessed to the bombing. Later in 1997, he was tried in Denver, Colorado. On June 2nd, he was found guilty on all counts of murder and conspiracy. He was sent to Florence, Colorado, where he lived among fellow bombers Ramzi Youssef, who was convicted of bombing the World Trade Center in 1993, also used in a Ryder van, and the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski. McVeigh was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection on June 11, 2001 at the Federal Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. In the years since the bombing, the federal government has added additional security features to existing buildings. In fact, only a month after the bombing, the Secret Service determined it necessary to close traffic on the 2 blocks of Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House. Existing federal buildings have been retrofitted with blast-proof glass and artificial barriers such as bollards, heavy planters, and short perimeter walls to prevent vehicles from parking close to the buildings. New federal buildings are being fortified using a balance of openness and security, using heavy planters, boulders, vegetation, trees, water fountains, and pools as attractive safety barriers, such as this one at 262 West Nueva Street, San Antonio, Texas, built in 2022. Today, the site of the Alfred P. Murrah Building at 200 Northwest 5th Street in downtown Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, is now home to the Oklahoma City National Memorial, which honors the victims of the bombing. The center of the memorial is a reflecting pool. Surrounding the pool are several monuments, including a field of empty chairs, each representing a life lost in the bombing, including Rebecca Needham Anderson, a nurse, volunteering in the search of the victims. She was struck by falling debris and later died on April 23, 1995. The original flagpole is still in use, and the east wall is intact, as well as portions of the south wall. There is also a museum that tells the story of the bombing and its aftermath. The chain-link fence at the west side is a popular spot for visitors to leave mementos and messages of remembrance for the victims of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. It's a place of healing and reflection for the thousands of people who were affected by the tragedy here on April 19, 1995.